This is War Map, New Successes in the Border Area. On the Berlik direction, the north group of troops is successfully advancing on several sectors and has occupied another village. Volkovka has become the third village south of the Volchya River that has come under the control of the Russian armed forces in May. Earlier, the north troops occupied the neighboring Tchaikovka and Pokalyanoe. A prospect of creating a wider and more extensive foothold south of the water barrier and further offensive towards the White Well is opening up for the Russian forces. This does not mean an immediate breakthrough, which is practically impossible in the current conditions due to the abundance of drones for both strikes and reconnaissance. And even gathering personnel for small group attacks is a very difficult task. In addition to creating a foothold south of the Volchya, the Russian armed forces units are clearing the gap between the river and the border. There, assault troops are advancing east from the Severodonetsk enclave, moving through one forest after another. On the eastern flank, fierce battles are continuing. The AFU is trying to push the Russian armed forces back from the line of the upper Dvorechye River, and attacks have been recorded near Otradnoe. There has been no information about the village being regained yet. It is important for the AFU to keep the Russian armed forces within a 20-kilometer strip between the border and the equipped line of defense, and therefore the tactic of active defense with disposable assault groups, tested on other directions, can be implemented here. Clashes near Vozdvizhevka. On the eastern Zaporizhia direction west of Gulyai Pol, Russian troops are trying to bypass the AFU's defense line, while the AFU is trying to slow down their advance by sending one-time groups of assault troops. In the area of Upper Tursy, Russian troops have once again occupied the territory on the outskirts and continue to successfully fight in the vicinity of this settlement within the village boundaries. To the south, the AFU is counterattacking in the area of Gulyai-Polsky, and to the north. To the north, units of the Russian armed forces are bombing Vozdvizhevka with air and artillery strikes. The exit to the outskirts of this settlement has already been achieved, but it's not entirely clear how the situation developed further. The AFU's activity is also not decreasing, but there are also rumors of successes of the Russian armed forces. Practically on the entire eastern Zaporizhia direction, Ukrainian formations are conducting active defense and often counterattacking with small assault groups, both on armored vehicles and on foot with several OSHPs. This affects the speed of the Russian armed forces' advance, as the same forest strips and positions have to be combed several times, wasting time and effort on eliminating lone fighters in the relative rear. However, even in such difficult conditions, with the support of airstrikes, artillery, and drone operators, the Eastern Military District continues to gradually liberate the Zaporizhia region. Threats near Stepnogorsk. From the west Zaporizhia direction, there are new indications of a deteriorating situation in Stepnogorsk and its surroundings, as well as in neighboring Primorsk. According to objective control footage, the AFU is already moving into the settlement relatively calmly, which indicates a loss of the Russian forces' position west of the city.
Хлопці, приготувати ще чуть-чуть! Приготуватись!
To the east, in the area of Lukyanovsk, the Ukrainian armed forces have occupied a part of the defensive belt, the battles for which have been going on for a long time. And only in Pavlovka is there still a focal presence of Russian units, although even this is under significant threat, given the current configuration of the contact line. The abundance of open spaces and the small number of shelters are causing many difficulties for the Russian armed forces, given the AFU's superiority in the number of drones. Moreover, the AFU is attacking in the direction of Stepno and Shcherbakov. And if the Ukrainian armed forces break through to the outskirts of Kamensk, we can talk about the loss of territories acquired during the offensive in early 2025 in very hard battles. In other settlements, including Energodar, the AFU has been systematically working on logistics for more than a week, primarily on gas stations. To the south, the number of strikes on roads and transport has also increased. And very recently, the activity in hitting gas stations in the south of the DPR has increased, which is done to complicate the transfer of reinforcements. It's hardly worth counting on the defensive belt of Russian units, created several years ago, in the current conditions. Both the Russian armed forces and the AFU have quite learned to overcome such barriers. The huge number of drones will not allow either to saturate these positions with personnel or to supply them properly. During the large-scale and unsuccessful offensive of the Ukrainian armed forces in 2023 near Rabotino, the AFU did not have the same opportunities to isolate the rear as now. Therefore, the situation is much more dangerous now in this regard. Problems near Borovaya. Recently, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced the complete liberation of the populated area Borovaya, and yesterday there were even footage showing the advance and the beginning of the battles for Borovaya. However, everything turned out to be not so rosy. At the end of April, the units of the Russian armed forces indeed carried out a series of successful attacks and seized the settlement of Borovaya. By the beginning of May, the situation for them was relatively favorable. But then the AFU was able to disrupt the logistics of the Russian assault troops and regained control over the village. After the completion of the attacks and the retreat of the Russian armed forces, footage was published, allegedly confirming the capture of the village. However, most of the video was shot 25 kilometers from Borovaya in the territory of the populated area Kolomichik, which has long been under the stable control of the Russian armed forces. Interestingly, Kolomichik is not the first time playing the role of a backdrop for false reports. Earlier, they filmed the control over Novoplatonovka after a very unsuccessful assault. And this, unfortunately, is far from the first such example. Earlier, similarly, the shooting in the rear of Volchansk was passed off as control over Kupiansk. Needless to say, the proofs of the category "maybe no one will notice" overshadowed all the achievements. The meaning of these actions is unclear, especially in light of the fact that the units of the Western Military District have real successes. The work on mistakes under Kupiansk is visible to the naked eye. The pincers of the encirclement of Lyman are strengthening. But in the information plan, the proofs of the category "maybe no one will notice" overshadowed all the achievements. Until next update.